Good afternoon, and welcome to the Daily Journal's Capitol View webcast, where we talk about state politics each week with Daily Journal Capitol Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison. I'm Chris Kiefer, managing editor for multimedia here at the Daily Journal. And Bobby, I guess you survived another deadline day. How's everything going down in Jackson today?
Actually, it's been pretty slow today. There hadn't many major bills taken up. Yesterday, as you referenced, yesterday was the day to get bills out of committee. The bill had to come out of committee in at least one chamber to stay alive. So in the process in the legislative session, where there's not many committee meetings, instead members are just in session and taking up bills on the floors of the House and the Senate. And the House took up bills this morning, and they've taken this afternoon off. The Senate's just starting back as we speak. So, but the bills taken up so far have not been very significant bills. There's not a lot of them this session, but there's just a handful that could have a major impact. But none of those bills have been taken up as of yet today, and probably won't be taken up today.
Sure. So we'll talk throughout the show about the deadline day and just kind of what we learned after yesterday and where things stand. But I want to start by talking about one of the most significant bills this session, in that it was just made it through committee yesterday on the deadline day, which is an expansion of the school voucher program. It started as a special needs scholarship program, and there was a Senate bill that would expand that beyond just a special needs program. Bobby, walk us through that a little bit.
Well, I think it was 2015 session that the special needs voucher program was passed in the legislature, and it just provided vouchers or scholarships to a limited number of special needs students to go to private schools. I think there's maybe 65,000 or so special needs students in the state, and this bill has allowed about 435 students are going to private schools through these vouchers this year. But the bill that passed out at the Senate Education Committee Tuesday would greatly enhance that program and open it up not only to special needs students, but to all students, and allow them to receive a voucher or scholarship to go to a private school. In year 5 of the program, as it's phased in, it would be over 21,000 students who could get a voucher or scholarship through this program to attend a private school. And say the voucher for a special needs student would be about $6,500, and the voucher for just a regular student would be about you may have it in front of you, Chris. I want to say around $4,500.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So just you kind of split the difference. Say put somewhere in the middle. Say 5,000 times 21,000 students. You're talking about more than $100 million taken out of the public schools and put in the private schools. So this is a significant step in an effort to incorporate more school choice into the state of Mississippi. So we see how it plays out this session. There's no House bill. There's just a Senate bill. So if it makes it through the Senate, it'd go to the House, where conventional wisdom is it'd be much more difficult to pass the House than it was to pass the Senate. But it could be a close vote in the Senate. I was kind of counting the votes earlier today, just guessing how people would vote on the bill, and it could be a real close vote in the Senate. But the conventional wisdom, if it does pass the Senate, it'll still face some struggles in the House to get it passed.
Yeah, so looking at the details, as you said, this began as a special needs scholarship bill that provides students with special needs $6,500 annually, or provides it to their parents to move them to private schools if they choose to do so. And as you said, 435 students are currently receiving the vouchers. What this bill would do is it would expand the number of seats, expand the number of vouchers available, and then special needs students would still have the first priority. The next priority would go to parents earning 250% or less of the federal poverty level, and then I guess beyond that, anyone else. Is that correct?
Right, that's right. Well, theoretically, it could all be special needs students who receive the vouchers. That's not likely, but theoretically, it could all be special needs students, and there'd be nobody else to receive them. But based on the number of people applying for the special needs vouchers, it's unlikely all those slots would be filled by special needs students, and it would then go to the. I mean, there's also some other stuff in there, Chris, I didn't get into in the story, like if you have a sibling who is getting the voucher, then that would, then the brother or sister of someone already receiving a voucher would be a top priority too. Or I think children of veterans somewhere is placed high in that list too. But in general terms, it would be special needs students, and then the students of parents earning around 250% of the federal poverty level, which is about $61,000 per year for a family of four.
Sure, and then the number of scholarships allowed for the first year would be capped at 0.05% of public school enrollment. Public school enrollment is currently 482,000 students roughly, so it would be about 2,500 students would be the maximum for this program. It would grow by 1% each year. That would go up to 21,700 students in year 5. Bobby, one thing I was thinking about in reading this and wanted to ask you as a history, as you kind of covered that bill, the initial bill, the initial special needs scholarship bill from 2015, if I remember right, maybe it was the second year that it was brought up that it passed. It seems like it took a little time, but it also seems like, if I'm remembering right, that one of the biggest concerns of maybe say public school educators and people at that time was exactly this, was it seemed to me that they didn't object as much to the scholarships for special needs students, but their fear was that this would be a bill that would eventually lead to that would eventually be expanded, allowing vouchers to a broader audience. I mean, do you kind of remember that?
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely part of the debate back in 2014 and 2015. You're right. It took 2 years to get that bill passed. It didn't, it passed the Senate the first year, but died in the House. And the second year, they were able to pass it in the House as well as the Senate. And Nancy Collins, who was then the state senator from Tupelo, was instrumental in getting that legislation passed. And there was concern at the time. There was two concerns about the bill that were expressed. One was that it would be opened up to all students, that it was just kind of getting the foot in the door for school choice proponents. And the second issue was, as I stated earlier, there was like 65,000 special needs students in the state, and this bill would they were saying that there's issues with special education in the public schools, and this was a way to address it. But this bill would, if there was issues with special education, some people were saying, well, we need to do something other than this bill, because this bill is going to have a few hundred students, but there's 65,000 special needs students, and this is far outside my area of expertise, Chris. So that's never stopped me before, but I want to be careful, because there's parents with special needs students who get up and struggle and have problems every day, and I respect that and have empathy for those parents. But there's kids in the public schools who are in special needs programs who $6,500, which is what this voucher provides to the special needs students. $6,500 doesn't come close to covering the expenses of these kids. These kids, there's kids who the public schools are spending $25,000 a year to educate, because the federal government, the federal court said all kids deserve an education, and rightfully so. That's the right. I wholeheartely agree with that, but those aren't the kids taking advantage of the special needs voucher in a lot of instances. And like I said, I want to be careful and not to, because if I had a public school, if I had a special needs child, I might be in head of the line to get one of these vouchers. I don't know, but there's so many kids in the public schools that are costing much more than $6,500 to educate. And they're the ones that need the most help, I feel. And this bill didn't do anything to help those kids, because, as I said, $6,500 wouldn't come close to covering the expenses for those kids. I remember talking to, and I won't name any names, but when this bill was being debated in 2014, 2015, I remember talking to a woman, a parent from Tupelo, a very nice lady, I was asking her why she supported the program. She said, "Well, this will allow me to get help for my son. I desperately need help." And I believe she was being truthful and honest. And we kept on talking, and she was under the impression that she could keep her child in Tupelo public schools and then get this voucher to get additional help for her child. And I explained to her, I said, "No, ma'am, that's not the way the bill works." And so, I mean, there was just, there was just a lot of misconceptions about the bill when it passed. And, I'm sure there's kids out there it's helped, but, this is a tough policy issue. We got to decide whether we want to, spend public funds on private schools. A lot of people have, philosophical opposition to that. Other people support it and feel strongly about it. There's good people on both sides, but it's going to be a difficult issue for the legislature to deal with this year. And if it doesn't pass this year, I suspect it won't go away, just like the original bill did. The original bill took 2 years to pass. But my prediction, though, Chris, if the bill doesn't pass this year, there would not be much effort to pass it in the next session, because next session will be the session right before a statewide election. So it's such a the conventional wisdom is legislation doesn't deal with controversial issues in election year. So I think if it doesn't pass this year, it'll go away until at least the session after the elections in 2020.
Yeah. Bobby, when is the deadline for the Senate for the chamber to take action on it?
You asked me a question I can't answer. My guess would be next Thursday, but next Thursday sounds about right. But I don't have a calendar right in front of me. But that'd be my guess. And traditionally, what the Senate does, that may be the most controversial issue on this calendar. Traditionally, what the Senate does is wait till the last minute to take up the most controversial issue. Wait till the end of the deadline, closer to deadline. So I would be surprised if that bill is taken up this week.
Bobby, you mentioned the philosophical debate. I guess kind of backing up for people that are maybe even new in this issue. I mean, I guess the philosophical debate on both sides of the issue, the people in favor of this program would be a school choice argument, giving parents the options to more options and not letting, I guess, the cost of attendance limit the options for parents have. And the other argument from the public school advocates would be you've already got a cash-strapped public education system, and rather than putting more money and making that system better to reach more students, you're taking money out and diverting it to private sources. I mean, does that capture it, or are there kind of other things that you've heard from the debate on this? That
captures it, and this. I mean, and as I said, I mean, I see both sides of the issue, but you have to, I hear people on the school choice side all the time say, the money follows the child it's their tax money, so they should be able to spend it how they want. But technically, no, it's not their tax money. It's the public's tax money. Using that logic, I don't think my library, does a good job. I want my taxes back that's spent in the library, and I go down to Books A Million and buy me the books I want. It's just this. I don't have. I'm an old guy now. I don't have any kids in the public schools. I did for many years, my taxes go to support the public schools, not for any particular one child, but for the betterment of the community. And there's a lot of people would argue that you have a good public school system, it makes the community a lot better. That's been the argument in Tupelo and Lee County for years. And some people fear that if you have if you're taking money out of the public schools to send it to private schools, that's going to weaken the public school system. That's that's part of the argument too.
Sure. Bobby, when we talk about the debate behind this too, I thought it was interesting yesterday when this came up. Would be Senator David Blunt of Jackson questioned bringing this bill up so late on a deadline day with not a lot of hearings or discussion on this. That's a general thing. I know you had a column about it last week that you're kind of sensing that debate on some of these bills doesn't have the same value that it used to. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I've been here for a long time now, and no administration is perfect, and and they all do good things and bad things. But one thing that has been just sort of just consistent during the in recent years is the debate that used to occur on the hearings that used to occur on major pieces of legislation and major proposals. There was a time when before such a controversial issue was brought before the legislature, the Senate Education Committee would have met this past summer to hold hearings and get input on how school choice options have done in other states, what the state what the private schools think about school choice. Are they for this, what the public schools think. But we just don't have that anymore. What happened yesterday is, Gray Tollefson, he's a Senate Education Committee chair from Oxford. He's one of the smartest members of the legislature, I think. Wants to do the right thing, but he explained the bill in about 5 minutes, and then he asked if there was any questions on the bill, and there was a few questions. Folks like Senator David Blunt from Jackson spoke against the bill, and then it passed the Senate Education Committee all in 15 minutes probably. There was a time in the legislative process when before such a major proposal was passed, there would have been hearings and a lot of discussions about that, but we don't have as much of that anymore. I mean, it's just pretty much the leadership says this is what we need to do, and the leadership works behind the scenes to put its votes together, and then it's brought before it's brought up and passed with a little debate, but not any there's just not they just don't call in the experts and the people who are affected by such a bill, and to gather information from them before bringing it up for debate, for a vote. You just don't have that anymore, and I think that's a real flaw in the current process. I think it leads to bills that's passed without any compromise and without any hammering out the differences and trying to reach common ground. I mean, instead, it's just an effort to ram something through. And that some people might think that's good, but in the governing process, there's an argument to be made that that's not the right way to do it.
Yeah, the example you wrote about in your column had to do with the MAEP rewrite bill, and when that was on the House floor, I think it was 17 different amendments were proposed. And some of those, as you said, were very well thought out. Some of those were issues even proposed by Democrats that were key Republican issues, things that Republicans have supported through the years. But there wasn't any discussion on them. Essentially, who was it? The education chair, Richard Bennett, just said no, and the House voted him down. Is that
right? And Richard Bennett, most public education supporters are ecstatic that he was appointed this year as the Education Committee chair in the House. So this is no reflection on him. It's just it's just the way the process works now. On this very important bill to rewrite the state funding formula that determines the amount of money that goes to local school districts. There were 17 amendments offered by the minority Democratic Party. As I said, some were well thought out, some were, not that well thought out probably. But in each instance, the presenter of the amendment would get up, make his case, and, explain the amendment. And in some, as I said, in some instances, had gone to great lengths to research and to develop the amendment. And Bennett would simply stand up and say, I oppose the amendment, vote against it, please, or something to that effect, and sat down. And he knew the Republican leadership that wanted this bill passed had gathered the votes and said we don't want to put any amendments offered by Democrats into the bill, and that was it. That was all it took. The amendment was voted down along party lines. I made the point in the column, I think you might be referencing, Chris, that Nick Bang from Corinth, a Democrat, offered an amendment that had been a Republican talking point for years and years, that they wanted to make sure to direct the money to the classroom and not to administration. He offered an amendment that would have taken steps to do that, and that amendment was voted down. The same way with Chairman Bennett just simply stand up and say, please vote against the amendment, and that's all it took. So I mean, that's the way the process works right now. For some people, are happy about that, but it's there was a time in the legislative process, as I think I've talked about before, where, committee chairs, the leadership was interested in maintaining power, but they just kind of let the committee chairs had to get up and make their case and argue for something and defend, tell why they opposed amendments and stuff. But you don't see that now on a lot of times on major pieces of legislation. You just have what happened last week with the education funding bill.
Sure. Going back now to yesterday's deadline day, and as we said at the top, a lot of bills died on the deadline day for not making it out of committee. One of the most significant that did so was the state lottery. You've written before about there seeming to have been a lot of momentum building towards the lottery. Several bills were filed in the lottery. Some would have directed revenue towards education. Some would have directed it towards transportation needs. The House had formed a study committee looking at the issue, but the bill was never taken up in the Senate. Would that be the Finance Committee or Appropriations Committee? Anyway, talk through that issue.
Well, I mean, there was bills in the Senate, in both the Senate Finance Committee. Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, who presides over the Senate, had referred some bills to the Finance Committee, and at least one bill to the Transportation Committee, and all those bills died. Speaker Philip Gunn, who has made it clear that he's opposed to the lottery, had indicated that he did not want a lottery bill to originate in the House, but he kind of hinted that if it originated in the Senate, he wouldn't, he might allow the House to consider it, but there was no bills that made it out of committee. But that doesn't mean the issue in the legislative process, which you could spend a whole day explaining all the ins and outs of the legislative process. There's a possibility it may be revived in another bill some way. We would just have to see. But for right now, the lottery is dead. But who knows? It may come back before the session is over. It may rise from the dead.
Sure, there was I guess a little bit of a back and forth yesterday. Said Joey Fillingane is over finance in the Senate.
Right, Senate Finance. Yeah.
And I'll let you tell us about that.
Well, he pretty much said that, I'm not bringing the lottery bill out of my committee because, it should be pointed out, there was one of the Phil Moran from the coast, who's one of the senator from the coast, one of the primary lottery proponents, says he has a signed commitment from 40 members of the Senate, the 52 members of the Senate, to vote for for a lottery bill. So if that's true, and I have no reason to doubt it, if it makes it to the floor of the Senate, it's going to pass overwhelmingly. But Chairman Fillingane said he didn't bring the bill out of his committee because he knew it would die in this House, because Philip Gunn has made it clear that he's opposed to the lottery, but the House Speaker. But as I said earlier, the House Speaker has indicated that if it comes out of the Senate, they won't just summarily reject it. So I think Speaker Gunn was kind of taken aback that he had that much influence in the Senate to
right.
to kill it. I think I can't remember the exact quote from him, but it was pretty much I don't control what happens over there. They decide what bills to take up and not to take up. So I wish he did. He probably thinks he probably thinks he wished he did have that type of influence on all legislation. But
right.
But anyway, so that was kind of an interesting back and forth.
Yeah, another issue, Bobby, that we've talked about as being a key issue in this session is Medicaid and efforts to rewrite the state Medicaid program. You had a story last week about some of the bills that were being discussed. And I'm trying to remember the details. This is from the House Medicaid Committee. They would have dealt with certificates of need for hospitals, and I guess and kind of walk us through that. Walk us through in general what has happened so far, what has passed and what's alive, and kind of what are we looking at in terms of possible tweaks to Medicaid?
Well, the key thing to remember, Chris, is in terms of Medicaid, everything's alive.
Oh, because it's appropriations. And yesterday was just general bills.
Well, no, because this is a year where the Medicaid, they put into law what they call repealers, where every so often a big agency like Medicaid will cease to exist unless there's a new law put in place to extend its life. And so, unless legislation is passed this year, Medicaid will cease to exist on July 1st, 2018. And everybody knows that's not going to happen. But to do that as a way to kind of review the agency through what they call a technical amendments bill. And so the technical amendments bills are alive in both chambers, and there's some words in those technical amendment bills say, what they want to do, but those words really aren't important right now because all the code sections dealing with Medicaid are alive. So they'll go to a conference committee, 3 key House members, 3 key Senate members, later in the process, decide how they want the Medicaid program to look, decide what, if any, changes to make in the program. And they will come back late in the session with that compromise and for the House and Senate to vote on. Now there could be some major changes in that compromise. There's been talk about some, expanding the managed care program to allow Mississippi hospitals to operate managed care programs. The Mississippi hospitals want that option, want that ability, which sound like inside baseball, but the Mississippi hospitals say that's crucial for them to, in today's environment, for them to be able to, for a lot of the small hospitals to survive, to be able to get involved in the managed care program and receive some of that money. There may be efforts through the technical amendments bill to expand the number of drugs that Medicaid prescription drugs that can be Medicaid recipients can receive in a month. There's been some talk about that. There could be some, things to limit eligibility some way. There's all sorts of possibilities out of what may come out of that technical amendments bill at the end of the session.
Sure.
Some of the stuff is technical, but it's but a lot of times it's stuff that affects more than 700,000 Mississippians who on Medicaid, and also there's it could affect their family members too. There's say for instance, right now nursing home people living in nursing homes who are on Medicaid are not in the managed care program, but they could be put in a managed care program that could change their benefits some way. And what you have to remember is like 90% of the people in nursing homes in Mississippi are on Medicaid. The Medicaid is staying for their nursing home for fees.
Sure. Well, Bobby, what else kind of, again, as we get through the deadline day, anything else yesterday that, that kind of stood out that surprised you one way or the other?
Well, the Senate didn't come out with any highway plan. They can still, there's House bills that they could amend to develop a plan. And, it was a general bill deadline. So there wasn't a deadline for bills dealing with taxes and stuff. So they could still come up with the legislation later in the process to deal with highways. But right now, it's very much up in the air, what's going to happen dealing with transportation issues, which, was one of the major factors, one of the major issues coming into this session, the fact that so many people say the state needs to spend a lot more money on transportation. So far, that's far from being worked out, but it's still relatively early in the process, I guess about midway through.
Yeah, sure. What about the next few days? What are some of the big things that you're kind of looking for? Obviously, as we mentioned, maybe within sometime in the next week, the full Senate will have to act on the voucher bill one way or the other. But what are some of the other key issues maybe over the next week?
Well, there's very few big, what I would consider major bills on the legislative calendars for the next few days. There is the House has a bill on its calendar that would greatly put limits on the abortion rights in the states. Some people would, a lot of people would argue what the bill under current law would be unconstitutional, but that bill is on the House calendar. There's a bill that's has the interest of a lot of people that would dealing with school boards that would all school districts that have an elected school board, it would change the laws. So instead of being the school board members being elected in staggered terms, they'd all be elected at one time, like county supervisors or or whatnot. And so, right now in most school districts, maybe 2 school board members are elected one year, then 2 more the next year. And it's staggered terms, and the people that support that say it makes sure that there's not just mass turnover on the school board. There's always the institutional knowledge is always there, but other people say that it would make it easier and more consistent with other statewide elections if all the school board members were elected at the same time.
Sure. Well, there'll be a lot more to follow. And again, you can keep up with that through Bobby's coverage in the Daily Journal and at djournal.com. So that does it for another episode of Capitol View. We thank everybody for joining us and remind you can catch us each week. We're usually on Monday. Obviously, we're a little bit later this week because of scheduling. But anyway, we're generally Monday at 2 at djournal.com. The replay is always available there if you look in our video gallery at djournal.com or on our Facebook page. And you can get the latest updates when we have schedule changes and whatnot. Look for that on Twitter at djournalnow. So I'm Chris Kiefer for Bobby Harrison. Again, we thank everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week.